Out of the street corners they scream. You knew it was coming. You've been waiting for this for months. Rumour hardened into fear and now they scream at you. The sirens, their hysterical wail tearing through the white noise of the city. And you run. You run to pick up those things that can never be replaced. A picture of them in the days when they still loved you. Your mother's wedding ring. And then you turn to your shelf of games. You only have room for 5. 5 games for Doomsday. 5 Games for Doomsday is a show in which board game personalities are thrust into a cabin in the woods to outrun an oncoming disaster, but can only take 5 of their games with them. But which will they choose? My guest this week is at the top of the tree in Australian game design. He started programming in BASIC, but has then gone on to design some of the most well-known games of recent times. From his first published game, Archaeology, he's gone from strength to strength, publishing titles such as Bärenpark, Gizmos, and the Spiel des Jahres-nominated Imhotep. My guest this week is Phil Walker-Harding. Phil, welcome to the cabin.
I was just saying the name of your podcast is not as funny as it was last time I listened, with what's going on in the world right now, but it is good to be safe from Doomsday, at least for the time being.
So I guess my first question is, how difficult was it for you to pick the 5 games, and kind of what was the criteria you chose when picking them?
Yeah, it was incredibly difficult, actually. It was a really hard process. I looked at my shelves for a long time. And in the end, I think I pretty much went with that gut feeling of what I would miss the most. And yeah, some I would miss playing, but some I would just kind of miss, I guess, just having in a strange way. So it's a bit of a mixed list. It's pretty different to my top 5 of all time. It's kind of like my top 5 I would really miss if I never could play again, in a way. So that's kind of how I approached it.
And so, sort of, what kind of person are you? Are you a sentimental person, and are you a person that attaches sentiment to objects? Is it that sort of remembrance of things past thing? When you look at something, you remember all of those previous times you've experienced it.
I think probably I would say yeah. I'm reasonably sentimental, and I mean not with everything and not all the time, but certainly there are some games that have very vivid memories attached to them, particularly games, I guess, from when I was first getting into modern gaming. And for those games, yeah, I think that was actually a factor in why I chose some, because they do have quite a lot of fondness, I guess, for me.
And sort of, how would you feel about, having to abscond to the cabin, only taking 5 games with you, and having the rest of your collection and essentially the rest of your possessions, succumb to the void? Are you someone who is attached to material things, or are you quite sort of minimalist?
I definitely try not to be. Being a game designer, you tend to have quite a lot of kind of just junk around. So boxes and bits and games everywhere. So it's hard to be a total minimalist. But I do try and live pretty simply. And so my game collection is about 250, 300-ish, which, when most people walk into my house, they think I'm crazy. But for a lot of gamers, that's pretty average. I do think these 5 games could keep me pretty entertained. And I think for those of us with a lot of games, it's a good thing to remember maybe that even though we like to have big collections, actually a lot of the games we have could be played a lot more than they are. And that's probably the joy that all awaits us in the cabin.
And so, I'm sure you acquire certain games for free, being in the industry. But when you buy a game, what attracts you to it? Is it the designer's name? Is it the cover of the box? Is it some unquantifiable gut feeling that makes your hand move towards it?
It's often designer. I often buy games by designers I like, even when I know very little about them, and even if they haven't got particularly good kind of reviews. Just because I'm fascinated by certain designers and how they work. I think it's a combination of presentation and what I've heard about the gameplay. Like sometimes I'll hear a little snippet about some new mechanism or something a new game does, and I just have to try it. And sometimes, yeah, it's just that combination of I like this designer, this theme looks fun, the art's amazing. Yeah, so I don't buy anywhere near as much as I used to, but when those kind of things come together in a new title, I often have to snap it up.
Yeah, I mean, I think for me, it's sort of there are certainly certain artists that I look at and I think this is probably going to be a game for me. So for me, for example, if I see a Dennis Lohausen cover or a Clemens Franz cover, I think, yeah, probably I'm going to get something out of this game. Are there any artists that you look at and you think, oh yeah, they illustrate the kind of games that I like?
Let me think. Not really. I think it's more like a product design thing at the moment. That's really the thing that grabs me. So like, for example, a lot of the French publishers at the moment just have this really amazing art direction style they're going with. I'm thinking of companies like Funforge, and just when you see one of their titles, you're like, wow, there's somebody just overseeing every aspect of the visual presentation here. And some smaller publishers like Keymaster at the moment, there's just something about, I think, the way certain publishers do just their art direction and product design that grabs me. I mean, I have some favorite artists, but I think that's more the thing these days. Yeah.
So I want to go back to the beginning then. So you're Australian, you grew up in Australia, and your brother's also a game designer and a publisher. Did you both start designing games at the same time?
Well, I guess in a way we did, because when we were both very young, we played board games at home. And one of the things we did as like just a silly craft kind of project was make our own board games when we were really little. And then when we were a bit older, David and me and my cousin, we all got together and kind of took it up as a bit of a hobby again. So we'd play games and make games. Now they were really silly and, we didn't take it super seriously, of course, but it was just, I think we were always drawn to making our own when it came to games. So yeah, that's something I've been doing since I was really little, and same with David.
And are you like that in all areas of life? When you so me, for instance, when I started listening to podcasts in the 2000s, I thought I'm definitely going to have a podcast at some point. When I read books, I think I'm definitely going to start writing. When I listen to music, I think I'm definitely going to write some songs. Are you that kind of person too?
100%. Like, to a fault. To the point that, sometimes when I feel myself getting into a new hobby, I have to go, I don't really have space in my life to, become a showrunner for a TV show. So I probably shouldn't start watching that. Yeah. So I definitely enjoy things largely by kind of dissecting them and thinking about how I could make them myself. Which, sometimes is a bit stressful, and I find it hard sometimes to just passively take in kind of entertainment. I'm always kind of got the creative brain on thinking about it on that kind of level. So definitely. So I've been in bands, I've made films, I've done lots of things, and sometimes it's hard to narrow down what you want to focus on as a creative person. But I guess for me, it's kind of settled on.
I mean, can you play games as a gamer, or are you constantly playing them as a designer?
Oh, no, I can still play games and enjoy them, I think. Unlike, say, reading books as an author or watching movies as a filmmaker, I think because there are other people involved when you play, even if I'm playing a game and I'm like, ugh, wouldn't have designed this, and not thinking kind of, this is not the game for me, I think often the other people at the table remind you that, oh, this is a social experience. We're all here to play together, and that kind of lifts you a bit out of your kind of internal monologue at that point, and you just go, oh yeah, let's just have a good time. So I think I can, but it's harder than it used to be, for sure.
And so your first gaming love was the NES. What drew you to that console?
Well, I got it when I was 8, which is probably the best time to get it. And I also got it. So we moved to the United States for a few years when I was 8. And me and my brother saw it in a shop and kind of, gently suggested to mum and dad that we'd love that. And I think they bought it for us out of a bit of a, like, welcome to a new country. This might help you settle into a new country kind of gift. And it kind of did, because it worked, because all of our friends, all the kids we met played the Nintendo, and we just instantly connected with a whole bunch of kids locally over it and played games together. And we just it just became a complete obsession for a few years. I think so. Yeah, it's just purely that first exposure. My first, I'd played some computer games, obviously, but my first exposure to like a modern console. So it was just, and Super Mario Brothers and Duck Hunt, pretty history making games. So it was just the excitement of discovering that. But looking back, I also think I was always really attracted to platformers like Mario and other games. And I really lost a bit of interest in video games when they became largely, 3D simulation as kind of the mechanism for delivering the kind of gameplay experience. So like from N64 on, I kind of yeah.
So the transformation to sort of Mario Galaxy, that sort of thing.
Oh, even before that. So I remember playing Mario 64 and, playing the first level and seeing a Goomba coming towards me and realizing I could walk around it instead of being forced to jump over it like in a 2D platformer. I was like, I don't want to be able to walk around a Goomba. I want to have to jump over it. This isn't the real world. So there's something about the simplicity, the kind of flat world of a 2D platformer that I love. And I think the closer games got to modeling reality, the less kind of excited I got by them. And that's, I think, why I love board games, is because they model something about reality, but in this incredibly abstracted way in 2 dimensions. And that language of doing that, I find really fascinating.
And so you started designing games in BASIC, and you've said that they helped inform your analog design. In what ways did they?
Yeah, so I got into basic programming because I wanted to, I played video games, so I wanted to make them. So I just started making really simple games on the computer. And, I mean, obviously they're very different to board games, but in terms of thinking about, I guess, the structure of a game and how a game works and how it's your job as the designer to kind of tweak the structure of a game to deliver fun to the user. I guess I was thinking about that even from 9 and 10. And I think when I got back into designing board games, I guess that part of my brain snapped back on. So it's hard to quantify, but I do think a lot of designing games is about, thinking very empathetically about your audience and thinking, what will be more enjoyable for, people I've never met, and how can I make this system easier to find the fun.
And so you studied film. What is it about film that drew you to the study of it?
Well, I grew up loving movies as well, and particularly my dad introduced us to a lot of older movies and classic Hollywood when we were young. So a lot of my favorite movies growing up weren't just what was out at the time, but were older films. So I think I always thought about movies in a little bit of a different way, not just as, the latest blockbuster coming out and what toys can I buy to go along with that. But I think I always had a view of film a little bit more as an art form. So I got into Hitchcock in my teens and started reading film theory books. And I just was really fascinated by, again, how the grammar of film can evoke emotions in the audience. And so when I finished high school, I think my biggest passion at that time was cinema. So I was just a natural thing. It's like, that's what I want to do. So I applied for a film course and I got in, and that's what I did.
And so what kind of films are you drawn to? Are you drawn to certain films in an academic sense and other films in a purely entertainment sense, or do they overlap?
They overlap a lot. And I think it's kind of a shame in a way that the way we talk about cinema now is so... There's this real dichotomy between, quote unquote popcorn movies and, serious movies or Oscar bait or whatever people want to say. Because I think...
Well, I think it happens in games as well, right?
For sure, yeah. It happens in every art form. And I think it's truer and less true at different times. And I think for cinema, there were definitely times, in the 30s and 40s when the great works of art were also the great pieces of entertainment. And I think, take popular music. In the 60s, it was the same. Like, all of the critical darlings were also on the charts. So I think I'm really drawn to classic Hollywood for that reason, that these are films that were designed both to be broadly entertaining to a mass market, but also written and directed by people who had really meaningful statements they wanted to make and beauty they wanted to put up on the screen. And somehow those two things weren't kind of in two different categories, but the Hollywood system, for all its faults, was able to kind of marry those things together somewhat successfully for a little while there. So that's the period I really love.
I think Billy Wilder is a great example of that, right?
Oh, yeah. Yeah. He's one of the greatest directors ever for that reason, that he can somehow make a movie that one person will watch and go, oh, that was a great kind of rom-com. And someone else will go, what are you talking about? That was like a critique of capitalism. Like, didn't you, somehow he's able to do both at the same time. And yeah, so I watched Sunset Boulevard when I was 12, and I don't know if it's too big a thing to say, but almost changed my life in the sense that I remember walking out of the lounge room thinking, I didn't know movies could do this, like I just had this, it was like playing Settlers for the first time, I guess. It was like, wow. And especially because it was such an old movie, it was in black and white, and I didn't expect to be just hit with it the way I was. But yeah, what a film.
And so if I had to pin you down and we did this exercise but in film and you only had one choice, who's the greatest director of all time?
It's tough. It's very tough. I think if I had to pick which director's work I would want to take with me into the cabin. Oh. Yeah. Okay. If I can't give just one. I have to give three. So if I had to pick if I could only watch one director's movies in a cabin with, say, friends and family, it would probably be Hitchcock, because you've got such a great body of work, so much just pure fun and just visceral filmmaking. But if I had to pick, like, whose movies would I want to preserve for, put in the time capsule as excellent examples of cinema, it would probably be Billy Wilder. And if I had to pick the best, like, technician as a director, I think, even though it's a bit of a cliche, I think Kubrick holds up for me. When I watch 2001, when I watch The Shining as purely like technical pieces of movie making, I just think no one was as perfect. Now, you might not like either of those movies, but it's hard to argue with how well they're kind of crafted.
Barry Lyndon is simply astonishing, I think.
Oh, yeah. Like, the first time I watched Barry Lyndon, I thought, how a lot of the scenes begin with just a still shot and it slowly zooms out? multiple times I remember thinking, oh, he's photographed a painting. He's just filmed an oil painting. And then as it zooms out and starts to move, you're like, oh no, that's celluloid and that is humans. Like, yeah, the lighting, the cinematography and lighting in that movie is some of the best ever. Yeah.
So, your first game then is a classic, and from a classic designer, and this is a choir from Sid Saxon. Does this game still hold up compared to modern games? And if it does, how does it?
I think it does. It has, I would say it holds up because it has a really simple system that's really easy to understand and learn that creates really surprising kind of emergent patterns and moments in the game. The one clunky part of the game is the way kind of money and payouts are handled. It's really granular, and you're passing paper money all around the table. But I guess back in the day, that was just part of what a board game was. But apart from that one element of clunkiness, it could have been designed by Knizia in the 90s or by someone today. Even like it just has that streamlined system that instantly feels classic, I think. Yeah.
And where does Sid Saxon rank in the sort of great game designers?
Very high. I mean, to me, he's more of a kind of, and I mean this in the best possible sense, like a figurehead. Like, to me, he's the first modern game designer in the sense that he kind of took game designing seriously. He kind of presented himself as a designer. He thought it was important to be seen and known as the designer of these games. He studied game design. He wanted to get better at game design. He documented game design. Now, has he got, 5 of the top 20 popular games being played today? No. Some of his games have been forgotten. A few still live on. But in terms of his impact, his influence, his importance, it's hard to top him. And everything that's happening now, we tend to trace back to, German games in the 90s or a bit before that. But I think that can be traced back to Sid Saxon because most of the early recent German designers quite proudly say that it was games like Acquire that made them rethink how to design board games.
And to what extent has Sid Saxon inspired you as a designer?
When I play his games, I get a real sense of his personality and his style. And I think that's the main thing that inspires me. It's that feeling of wanting to have a signature, a kind of feeling. And maybe this goes back also to those 3 directors I mentioned. They all have a very obvious, clear personality that comes through in their movies. And I think that's probably what inspires me the most. The idea that maybe someone could play a game and pick that it was mine for a good reason, I hope. I think that's something like really putting your personality and having a goal and a vision for your games and kind of trying to live that out.
So I want to talk now about you as a gamer. So what were the first games that really drew you into the hobby?
Well, when I was really young, it was, of course, Monopoly, but also Connect 4, Operation, Mousetrap, a whole bunch of mass markety stuff. And then, of course, the NES came along and just blew all that out the door. Other games, though, that kind of in that preteen teen time that I think had a big impact was Dungeon by TSR, the kind of dungeon crawl game. That had a big impact. And Scotland Yard I played when it came over from Germany. But of course, yeah, the games, once kind of I got into to modern designs, it was 3 all at once. In one weekend, I played Settlers of Catan, Carcassonne, and Lost Cities. And I think, yeah, that was like a major kind of awakening moment, particularly Settlers, because it felt like a game I should have been playing instead of Monopoly all my life. It kind of seemed to fit that niche of a game where you're building stuff on a board and moving around and trading and negotiating, but it was just better in every way. And then Carcassonne was just so like satisfying and simple. It was like making a jigsaw together and then claiming bits of it. It just felt so kind of classic and right. And then Lost Cities was just a study in how to draw, insane amounts of tension out of a deck of cards. And I think all of those at once just got me hooked right away.
And so, these are sort of classics of that sort of first wave of German games, I guess. How important are the German games from the 90s and designers like Klaus Teuber, like Klaus-Jürgen Wrede, like Rainer Knizia to the games that we play today?
Oh, I mean, I don't think you can overstate their influence. I mean, I think there's so many more recent designers who are kind of much more in the limelight now that it's probably for people who've come into the hobby in the last 5 years, they might not, know those names particularly well. But I think for someone who got into the hobby kind of at the tail end of that first big wave, I think they just broke so much new ground so quickly. I think that was what was so amazing. Like if you look at the winners of the Spiel des Jahres or what were popular games in the 80s, and then the acceleration that happens in the 90s, the amount of new mechanisms, the amount of new ways of playing that get kind of explored and even perfected so quickly. I think that's what opened this massive door that we're still kind of exploring all the ins and outs of what you can do with so little in game design. So for me, I still watch what they're doing. I still get a lot of their new games. I still greatly respect those designers, and I still often go back to their older designs too. And I find there's always a lot to learn.
And so, what kind of gamer are you? And do you gravitate towards the kind of games that you design?
Yes, I do. A lot of the gaming I do is on a pretty social level with, people who don't game very much, who wouldn't, call themselves in the hobby, quote unquote. So, so I'm often playing lighter games and quicker games. I'm often playing games that are easy to teach and finding games that work well in more casual groups. And I really enjoy playing in that space. I love seeing people discover games and get into gaming that way. I love seeing people who don't normally play games getting drawn into a game. I occasionally play with other groups and play more involved stuff. But yeah, my tastes kind of do align with what I create. And I think I would imagine that's the case with most designers, because it's always fun to kind of go off the beaten track and try something you don't really know much about. But for the most part, I think designing what you love and what you know is probably going to yield the best results.
And so if, for you as a player, if you were to distill a game down to 3 elements, what would they be?
You mean when I'm playing a published game?
Yeah, exactly. So forgetting, if you can, that you're a designer, what really makes you enjoy a game?
I think I might not have said this 10 years ago, but now I definitely think the product design, the way a game is presented to me, the art, the feel of the components, how fun it is to play with. That is a huge factor that I think affects us all in different ways, but often affects us without us really knowing. And I think sometimes I just enjoy the playing with the pieces, you know what I mean? And one of my later picks definitely fits into that category. So that's something I really notice now. The second thing would be, I think it's hard to put into words, but I think the moments of social, like fun, like when people burst into laughter together, or gang up, or make a deal, or suddenly realize something. Those little moments where people literally look up from the game, look at each other around the table. Those kind of social moments are really the things you remember, I think. And the third thing I've always been really aware of is the system. I love learning a new game and just being hit with the cleverness of the core engine of the design, the core mechanism. I love board games because that you can't hide that like you can in a digital game. It's not kind of under the hood; it's just there. The way the game works is just present on the table and in the rulebook. And I think I'm always been really aware of this is the system. Someone came up with this. Wow, this is a really clever mechanism. So yeah, that would be my three things.
So, your next game then is Blokus. And why are you taking Blokus to the cabin?
Well, Blokus. Well, I wanted to take an abstract. I think abstracts there's something about playing an abstract that just feels different. Somehow it uses a different part of your brain or something. By abstracting away all theme, you're kind of presented with just the rawness of the decision making. I don't love heaps and heaps of abstracts, but the ones I really like. And Blokus was probably the first modern abstract I played, and I love it because it is the best example for me of a game where every turn you're presented with, between 3 and 10 choices, and they're all urgent and you must do them right now. And you've got to figure out, the branching in that game of okay, if I go here, then I can open up that whole area. That's really important. But if I go there, I can block that player. That's really important. And every decision seems so important. And you've just really got to kind of triage all these decisions and figure out the best next move. And I just find that really exciting to play. It's not a great 3-player game, but at 2 and 4, I just still really enjoy it. And it's probably where kind of my fascination with polyominoes comes from, because I also love in that game that your pieces are just every single possible polyomino from 1 square size up to 5 square size. And you're just kind of given those pieces, these mathematical kind of, this set of mathematical certainties. Here are all the possible configurations of squares. Now go. And you kind of learn how each piece is different and how they work and what they're good for and what they're bad for. And yeah, so there's just something so kind of primal about that I love it.
And is Blokus the Tetris of board games? Is it the sort of polyomino game that gave birth to various children?
It definitely does feel like the Tetris of games to me, in the sense that I find it addictive because fitting together shapes and finding great spaces to fit a shape into, there's just something so satisfying about that in Tetris and in Blokus. They feel similar in that way. So I think that is a pretty good comparison, yeah. I also find it quite addictive. I often want to play multiple times in a sitting, like Tetris. I'm not sure if it's I definitely see it as the first of the recent wave of polyomino things. You'd have to ask other designers if it is an inspiration for them. But for me, it is like the first protocol for how to bring polyominoes into a game. And yeah, it's one of the best still.
So I want to talk now about you as a designer. So, you've designed a lot of games, and a lot of really successful games, and a lot of games that have garnered sort of critical praise. Do you think you were naturally predisposed to game design? Was your brain configured in that way?
I guess it must have been, in the sense that, when I was 5, I was trying to make my own games. When I was 10, I was trying to design my own computer games. I guess there was something in me that was able to think that way. I don't read much game theory, and I don't think in terms of game theory that much when I'm designing. So And I'm not like a huge maths person or anything like that, but yeah, I guess there's just something about my brain. I mean, I was always pretty good at maths and a little better at the humanities, and maybe being a bit of a half person is a good thing for being a game designer. I'm not sure, but yep, there's something in the old noggin, I think.
And so you and your brother were designing, you started designing at the same time. Was there any competitiveness between you two?
Well, not when we were really little, because we were designing ridiculous, silly things that, we only played once. More recently, I don't think I don't think so. David can correct me there, but I think when David kind of started Grail Games, I think it was and it was around, because I had done self-publishing myself with some of my earlier titles. I think it was clear, like, that we both sort of fell into our, I think, really strong areas. Like, I think I was a better designer, and I think he's really done a great job as a publisher. So I guess we kind of fell into different grooves at that point. But no, I don't think there was. I think it's funny with game design, even amongst game designers, professional game designers like that I've met, they're quite excited to test each other's stuff and encourage each other. Like, there's not, for some reason, it's not that a competitive. It's not that it's not very competitive as a field. It feels like we're all trying to make, every good game that comes out is kind of good. So, yeah.
And so Archaeology was your first published game. How did it feel to hold the box for the first time and have your name emblazoned on the cover?
It was a great feeling. It was. It felt really good. I'd self-published it, so I'd already seen my name on a handmade version of it, which didn't feel nearly as good. But I think when Z-Man put out their version, just seeing my game with their logo on it in their size box for sale in shops, it felt like an acceptance into the industry in a small way. It felt like a beginning, that it was still very much a hobby for me, but it felt like some validation that it wasn't just a silly little thing I was doing on the side, that maybe there was something I could do more in this area. So it was a great moment. And similarly, when Cacao came out, which was my first kind of game in a, like, I guess, big box game, it doesn't really have a board, but it's an actual board game, I guess. That was a similar feeling. I was like, wow, my name is on one of these things. It goes on the shelf next to Carcassonne. Great moment, great feeling of just an encouraging feeling, I think. Yeah.
And so, do you have a standard approach to designing a game? Do you have a notebook that then goes into a prototype, that then goes into a playtest? Or do you come at different games from different angles?
Yeah, I definitely don't have a prescribed process. It often does roughly follow scribbling notes in a notebook, very rough prototype, solo testing, better prototype, bring it to game night. I guess that's how a lot of them begin. But in terms of the seed of the ideas and how that process exactly flows, no, it's pretty all over the shop, really. I was trying to think once of what game design is most like in terms of creative pursuit. And it's very different from, I think it's very different from writing a book, from what I at least have heard. I think it's very different from making a film. I actually think, at least from what I know, it's closest to writing a song. And I think that's because, like, writing a song has a process. You've got to write the words, and you've got to know chord progressions, and there's some processes involved. But any songwriter will tell you, some songs pop into your head in 5 minutes. Other songs you try hard to finish for 10 years. Some songs you get the idea from reading a book. Some songs you get the idea from real life. Like, it's just something. There's a spark of inspiration that is very hard to kind of explain or put into words. So, yeah, every design kind of has a slightly different story. But yeah, my rough process is notes, solo testing, group testing, and endless iteration.
So, do you have an ethos behind your designs? And if so, what would that be?
I sort of do. It's not like an unbreakable one, but I definitely am trying when I'm designing to design games that are very approachable, very easy to learn, and that a very wide range of people could play meaningfully the first time. I think that's something I'm really aware of. I think board games have a higher barrier to entry than a lot of other forms of entertainment just because you've got to learn rules. And I think anything I can do to bring someone into a gameplay experience quickly and easily is something I'm shooting for while I design. And that's not just the rulebook. That's, the entire structure of the game. Like I often find myself cutting something from a game, not because it's not good, but because it's like, oh, it's one too many things, or that's the mental load is just a bit too much. That would require a third icon on every card, and I just can't go to 3 pieces of information. I'm often thinking about new players and wanting to just really welcome them into the game, and especially be able to enjoy the first game and to think ahead and make plans and pull them off in their first game. And I think that comes back to wanting to create games for a pretty diverse range of people. That's something I'm passionate about.
And so Imhotep was nominated for the Spiel des Jahres. How did that feel?
Yeah, amazing. I think that was an absolute highlight of my career so far. The day that got announced, I was on top of the world. Emails and tweets started pouring in from people I had never spoken to but really respected, congratulating me. I got to go to Berlin to the award ceremony and meet all these incredible designers and publishers and the industry that I'd really only seen from afar at that point. It was incredible. Again, like having my first game published, it felt like a real validation point, a real keep going moment and encouragement. And it had, there'd been lots of ups and downs. I'd been self-publishing for a while. I designed Imhotep 5 years before it ended up coming out, so it had been a long wait and a bit of a bumpy ride at points. So it kind of felt like a really great endpoint to that kind of early phase of my career. So yeah, real highlight. Loved it. Really thankful I got nominated and got to go. And I have a photo of me with the giant Spiel des Jahres logo man. I'll treasure that forever.
And, you see award ceremonies on TV and the award gets announced and the people who didn't win, they smile and they clap and they pretend to be happy for the person who won. Were you gutted when it wasn't Imhotep read from the envelope?
No, not at all. I was relieved. Believe it or not, I remember actually sitting in the chair kind of praying that I wouldn't win in a way. Not because I didn't want to win. It'd be amazing to win. But I was just like, Codenames should win. Like I think everyone felt that. At least, I felt that. And I didn't want to be known as the Vila Paletti to Puerto Rico, the undeserving win. And I just thought Codenames was such an incredible design. And I would have voted for it to win, and so I'm glad it won. So in a weird way, no, I was kind of relieved about it.
So your next game then is a classic, and this is Race for the Galaxy. Why do you think people hold this game in such high esteem?
I think it's because this is my theory. I think it takes what collectible card games do so well, which is, here's 1,000 cards and they're all different and they all do weird, wild things. The excitement of that, it kind of takes that and then packages it into essentially a Euro game, kind of an economic game, engine building game. And I think that marriage is really exhilarating because it's really a best of both worlds thing. You've got some massive deck of cool cards to explore that do all sorts of surprising things and synergize in different ways. But then it's also kind of a very tight system that rewards, repeated play that you can get much better at, that has all sorts of cool things to explore. So I think that's what it offers. At least when it came out, that's what it felt like it was offering. And I think it has such great replayability because of the variety that, it's been out for over, 12, 13 years now, and it's still got a devoted player base and all these spin-offs as well. I still play it. I still love it. I also think the multi-use card system in that is just so fun. It's just inherently interesting to be able to use cards in multiple different ways as that game does. And it's just one of the great mechanisms, I think, that just holds up.
So do you think card games have an intrinsic character as opposed to board games? And does Race for the Galaxy conform to that?
As I said, I feel like it feels closer to a collectible card game to me than a traditional card game. But I guess all of them have in common that cool feeling of the interplay between like closed information and open information. So I've got a hand of cards. You don't know what they are. You don't know what I'm about to play. You don't know what I'm about to do. I don't know what you're about to do. Card games are great at those surprising kind of moments of revelation. And yeah, I think that's in Race. And yeah, as I said, just seeing a huge stack of cards and, drawing a bunch of them and the surprise of seeing what you're going to get. Only card games can really pull off, I think, that feeling of discovery when you draw new cards and you build your hand and then build your tableau. So yeah, I would say it feels like a classic in a sense, but then it also, I think, is doing much more modern things with the card game too.
So I want to move on now and talk about your faith and how that connects to games. So the end of last year, you were in the States and you gave a talk on faith and games. Can you give us a précis of that talk?
Yeah, so there was a new conference started up in the States. The Presbyterian Church over there put it on, called the Theology of Play. And it was by a bunch of pastors over there who are also really into games, wanted to kind of think more deeply about the intersection of games and faith. And I was invited to come over and speak. And I actually gave two talks. One was on kind of like the history of board games, but from the perspective of how different cultures, faith, traditions kind of spill over into the way they play. So what we believe about the world, what we believe about God, what we believe about kind of justice, all those things seem to kind of play out in the games cultures make. So it was just kind of a bit of an anthropological kind of study of that. And I learned a lot putting that together, actually. It was fascinating. So that was the first talk. The second talk was much more me just kind of musing a little bit on Christian theology and the idea of creativity and design, and how game design is this really particular form of creativity, and how that kind of intersects with, I guess, Christian ideas of creation and creativity, which is a really rich area. I think it's kind of sad that, I guess in the past, Christians have certainly been known as being great artists, but not really the last 100 years for sure. And I think that's a real shame. And so just kind of exploring, tapping into that creative part of ourselves.
And how does your faith inform your game design? Where is the intersection between your Christian faith and you as a game designer?
Yeah, well, for me, So I also work at my church here, and I help look after a small congregation, which is particularly, I guess we're kind of particularly interested in reaching out to people who don't feel comfortable in kind of mainstream church. And so we're a pretty diverse group. And I think, to me, that is kind of the heart of Christian community, is people who are very, very different being able to come together and fellowship and love each other and serve other people together. And so I think games at their best, and I'm sure we've all had an experience of this, bring different people together around a table, people who may not necessarily get on if they met at the pub, but they're sitting around a table and they have this experience of play together, and somehow they're united in that moment, and their differences don't matter, and they have this incredible social interaction. And there's just something really kind of exciting and productive about that. And I think that's why I think that way about game design is how can I make games that facilitate that sort of community happening around the table? And that's a very similar thing to what I think about at churches, is how can I facilitate a space where very different people can come together and fellowship.
Are there areas, themes, concepts that you won't go into because of your faith?
Well, not in the sense that I, don't play Dungeons and Dragons because it's of the devil. Nothing like that. That's all, I think, a very simplistic way of thinking about how faith might interplay with entertainment. Blah, blah, blah. Just thinking of all the Christians I've annoyed. But cut that out, by the way. I think there are definitely themes and kind of ideas that I don't necessarily kind of want to give any more voice to or promote, because there's already plenty of them out there. Like, I'm not particularly drawn to kind of violence in games or war or stuff like that, just because, well, one, I'm just not drawn to it myself. I don't feel like spending a year dwelling on it. And two, that's kind of other designers are kind of in that zone. I guess I just try and I want to put like games into the world that are going to help people connect in a positive way. So I'm not usually thinking about controversial themes. But that's not because I think, it is a taboo I cannot touch. It's more just because practically that's where I want to go with my designs. Yeah.
And does that preclude you then designing an explicitly religious game?
I'm not interested. I'm not really interested in that. And it's one of those things, when people hear I design games in a Christian context, they'll come up to me and they'll say, "Oh, have you ever thought about designing a game about, insert Old Testament story here?" And, it's people's first thought a lot of the time, but it's just not something I'm interested in for a couple of reasons. One, like, I just think really didactic art rarely works, whether you're trying to just educate. Even educational kind of games rarely click, because I just think the players know when your motive isn't only to help them have fun. If you're trying to teach them something or explain something or, preach something, people just pick up on it, and it just somehow weaves its way through the design, and just, it's rarely a good thing. There's a few rare exceptions to that. I think, yeah, so it's not, and I also just don't like this tendency I think people have to want to, I guess, create a sort of a subculture, I guess, around their faith. So, like, we mainly, we have to listen to Christian music and watch Christian movies and have Christian TV and Christian radio. I just think that's not how my faith sort of I want to be in the world. I don't want to create a separate world in a bubble over here. I don't really want to create the Christian version of something. I want to create a really great, amazing, cool, beautiful thing. And that is informed by my faith. But when I first put out Archaeology, the card game, I can't remember who it was now, but I remember somebody said, "Oh, you could do a Christian version of this," and they came up with this like really awkward thematic tie of a way to make it Christian. It was really lame. And I guess the thing is, like if you think about most of the models for games, like most of the structures for games, competition, racing, building something, destroying something, like all of these metaphors we use in games, not many of them map that well onto, insert Old Testament Bible story here. So it often doesn't really work anyway.
And this is slightly away from gaming now, but what do you see as the role of a Christian in the modern secular context?
Well, the institutional church in the West hasn't had a good couple of centuries, I think it's fair to say. I think the average person in the West is rightly, quite skeptical of the institutional church. And I think that's because the church kind of became the center of culture for a period and kind of gained quite a lot of social power. And I think that's actually not a great place for the church to be. Like, the church has always been at its best when it's been, I guess, on the margins and dealing with the world's injustices and the most oppressed in the world, and bringing Jesus into that setting, much like the setting he came into. So I think, for me, I do think there is a lot, being a Christian in the West at the moment is a lot about sort of untangling and undoing some of the ways Christianity has become entwined in Western culture, which is really difficult and hard and awkward. And sometimes you just want to throw your hands up and think it's impossible. So I think I'm really interested in just trying to find new ways of, I guess, representing and being Christ to our culture that doesn't take them back to some of the structures of the past that have proved quite harmful. So it's a kind of an awkward time, I think. Now, certainly in other parts of the world, the church is in a very different place and much more interesting and exciting things are going on. But hey, I'm in the West and we've got to deal with our past and we've got to say sorry for some stuff and make amends for a lot of stuff. And I think reimagine a lot of stuff as well.
So your next game then is Tobago. How does this game foster interaction between the players?
Well, in a really interesting way. So, actually, first of all, this was the game that I mentioned before is like partially on this list just because of how great it looks and feels to play. I don't know if you've ever seen the components of this game, but they're just some of the best I've ever seen. You're on an island. There's the artwork's incredible. There's 3D palm trees and tiki statues and huts and little jeeps driving around. Is just so fun to play. But the interaction is really interesting because what you're doing is hunting for buried treasure. And the players are playing kind of pieces of treasure maps down to kind of find the treasure. But essentially what you're doing in mechanical terms is narrowing down the conditions of where the treasure is on the board. And so, you might say it's within 3 spaces of a palm tree. And then I say, oh, well, it's in a desert. And then you might say, well, it's also not next to a hut. And slowly we narrow down the spaces it could be in. And then you have to drive over and pick it up. But there's something really cool about it. Almost feels cooperative in that sense that while you're determining where a treasure is, you are in a sense working together. But of course, then once you've figured out where it is, you've all got to kind of compete to get it. So yeah, it does have this really cool, these two dynamics of play interaction happening where there's this race element where we're completely competing. but then there's this discovery element when we're working together.
And is this a game that makes you feel clever? And how important do you think that element of feeling clever is to enjoying a game?
Yeah, I think it does in a few ways because, one, as you're piecing together those treasure maps, you feel like you're discovering a treasure through deduction when really you're just playing down a legal card. But it feels like, you're very smart and you figured something out. Also, the little mini game that happens when you open a treasure chest, you get certain information about what's in that treasure chest that only you know. And so as the cards are flipped over, you have a kind of a leg up on everyone else about what's going to come out of that deck and what to take. And I think there's some very clever moments there too. But yeah, I think it's a great little tool in the designer's toolbox is like, how can I make people feel clever? I mean, that sounds a little mean-spirited, but it's this feeling of I tried to make something happen and it happened. That is like gold for a player. That makes you feel a great sense of resolution and a little bit of excitement when it comes off. So I think, it's a good way to think is how can I help my players to kind of achieve, maybe that's a nicer way to put it, rather than feel clever. But yeah, it is a cool dynamic if you can get it into your game.
So I want to talk now about the future. So what do you have coming in the future, and to what extent has this sort of coronavirus crisis held up things that you have coming out?
Well, I guess time will tell a little bit on that because, I mean, certainly some production of games around the world has shut down temporarily and some publishers are operating in kind of reduced capacities as well. But so far, nothing's kind of explicitly been delayed. But I'm sure there will be some delays as the year plays out. So yeah, let's hope for the best. The main thing I've been thinking about the last month or so is the next title in the adventure game series that I'm doing with Matthew Dunstan at Cosmos. These two came out last year, the first two, and the third one is out in German and is coming out in English soon. And we're working on the fourth scenario in that. And my brain's been very much in that world of these one and done adventure games / semi escape room game hybrids we've been doing. They're very different to design. They take a lot of kind of brain space for me to design, and they exercise a very different muscle for me. So yeah, that's the main thing I've been thinking about. I've got quite a few other things lined up, but nothing has been announced, I don't think, else that I can talk about, unfortunately.
And so, you design games that I would consider sort of slap bang in the middle of the Spiel des Jahres area. To what degree is winning a Spiel des Jahres a goal for you?
It's totally a goal. Like, I would love to win it, in the way I guess every filmmaker would love to win an Oscar. Even if they kind of think the Oscars are a sham, even, they probably still would love to win one. I don't think the Spiel des Jahres is a sham, P.S. I think it's a great award. And ever since I first saw it on the Scotland Yard box way back when, I remember thinking, wow, I can't believe there's an award for games. This is amazing. And they've done so much for the hobby. So, of course, I would love to be recognized. And I think it is a bit of a goal. It is something that motivates me. It is something that kind of drives me. I try not to, aim for it in this explicit sense of being super cynically like, okay, this can be a Spiel des Jahres winner if I do X, Y, or Z to it. I try not to think that concretely about it because I don't think that's probably the best process. But it is a goal. It's an award I respect. So yeah, it would be huge. It'd be great.
And do you think that it would financially change the game for you?
Well, from everything I hear, winning it is a financial game changer just because the amount of units it tends to shift in Germany alone. The market just kind of responds so positively to that award. However, for me, like I'm designing part time, working at church part time, and that's a really good kind of life balance for me right now. And I don't particularly need more income than I have. So I'm quite happy. So I don't think it would like change my life in that sense. I think I'll probably just go on with the same rhythm. Yeah.
And so, if you were eavesdropping on a room full of people talking about Phil Walker Harding games, what do you hope they would be saying about them?
Ooh. Well, actually, this kind of happened. I was at a convention when Imhotep had just come out, and I saw a table playing it, and I kind of walked over, and I could kind of hear them talking, and they were looking at my picture because my picture's in the rulebook, and they were saying something, and I couldn't quite make it out. And then they looked up and they saw me, and I happened to be wearing the same like woolen jumper I was wearing in that picture. And then they all turned around and started laughing and pointing. So, that was a bit embarrassing. I have more than one jumper, I swear. I think though, in reality, it will probably be, well, I think it would be something like this. So, I was once playing a game of code names after church with some people, and there's this older homeless fellow who comes along to our church, and I said, "Oh, do you want to play a game?" He's like, "Nah, not into board games. Don't play board games." And he stood at the side of the room and didn't seem interested at all. And we were just playing code names. And anyway, I noticed him kind of watching, and he didn't hear the rules explanation, but he was watching the game happen. And as the game progressed, he kind of edged towards the table and started watching, and then I noticed he started helping one of the teams, kind of figure out what words to pick. And next thing you know, he's on the team and he's fully playing, he's fully engaged, and by the end of the game, he's completely into it, loves it, and then he plays it again. I think hearing a story like that about one of my games, that it drew someone who didn't feel particularly, I guess, welcome or interested, fully into having a lot of fun around the table with some people, that I guess that's the thing I would love to hear.
So, your last game then is One Night Ultimate Werewolf. To what degree does this game fix Werewolf?
Well, I was never that big of a werewolf or mafia player. I didn't grab me when I'd played it. And I do think a lot of people would say that it fixes it in the sense that there isn't player elimination that can last for hours, which is a plus. But I kind of came to it as a bit of its own thing in a way, because I wasn't a big werewolf player. So I just heard about this new game and it sounded fascinating, and I gave it a go. I think it for me, it improves on it because it is great that it's so fast. It is great that no one is eliminated. But I actually think having that night phase have actions in it, like meaningful table changing actions happen, like that to me is what's so great, because it means then that when we all open our eyes and start accusing each other and talking, we have like real tangible events to kind of pin that all on. We have some evidence that we can bring to the table, that we can talk about, and seeing that kind of all fit together, seeing the pennies drop about what did happen at night, I think that is what elevates the game. And so to me, it feels quite different from Werewolf in that sense. That's what I love about it.
And so when people talk about social deduction games, you get a broad spectrum of opinion. Why do you think they're so divisive?
Yeah, I think that's true. I think it's because it's similar to party games that require you to act or sing or something. I think being required to bluff and lie and manipulate people on the spot is just not for everyone. Like some people just don't want to do that. They feel really either embarrassed to do it or it just doesn't feel right to them. They feel put on the spot. And I totally get that. So yeah, I do think you need to pick your group a little bit with social deduction sometimes for that reason. And I also think some people don't appreciate games that are played so kind of, some people say, above the table, So like, it's not so much about manipulating pieces in a physical space. It's much more about talking and discussing and mind games. Like, again, some people, that is just not where they want to play their game. And I totally get that too. But if you get a group of people who all want to play a game like that, then nothing beats it, really. Like, just for the experience you can have.
Fabulous. So one last question then. So you're heading out of Sydney, you're going into the bush to the cabin in the woods, and you go around the corner, the back door flies open, 5 of the games fly out into a billabong and are swept away forever. Which game do you hope is sitting in the backseat of the car?
A billabong's actually like an enclosed dead body of water, so there wouldn't be any current.
You see,
I kid.
That was me trying to be stereotypically Australian and completely failing on every. Eaten.
Of course.
4 of the games are eaten by a wombat. Which one do you hope is?
Okay, that's much more likely. I think it's a very hard decision, but I think I would probably go with Race for the Galaxy because I played it, I think, more than just about any other game, and I still enjoy it. It still feels like it has little mysteries to discover. So I feel like that's the safest bet. I do think I'm very close to saying Acquire as well because I feel like that is much more accessible and I could play that with more people in the cabin. And I feel like it has amazing replayability as well. But I think I'm going to go with Race just for the sheer like variety and discovery in that deck of cards.
So if people want to get hold of you, they want to find out what you're up to, how would they go about doing that?
Well, I have a little website, which is just my name, philwalkerharding.com. And that has, how you can reach me on email and social media. That's pretty much it. Yeah. Would love to hear from you if you want to chat.
Brilliant. Well, Phil Walker Harding, thank you very much.
Thank you.
You can support the show in many ways. You can tell your friends. You can talk about it on social media. You can talk about it in your own blog, podcast, or video. Or you can support it directly by going to patreon.com/5G4D for a rolling donation, or for a one-off donation, hitting the PayPal link at the bottom of the website, 5gamesfordoomsday.com. It's these donations that keep the show going. Also, if you want to say something nice about the show, or if you want to say something horrible about the show, you can contact me on Twitter at 5gamesfordoomsday, or send me an email at 5gamesfordoomsday@gmail.com. And if I've managed to tolerate my own company and the slow surrender of my computer, I'll see you in 2 weeks for another 5 Games for Doomsday.